I was just going to say that in relation to, kind of dovetails with your question as well, the jobs out there are drying up, in the field of English literature. They're just going. I mean, I remember when I got a job in like '92, it was supposed to be the nadir. Let me tell you, it plummeted a lot lower than that. The jobs that are available are digital humanities jobs. And why are they available? Because people need, departments need this. You can't wait. You can't just sort of leave a 10-year hiatus where people get through their monographs and then start doing things. It just kind of doesn't work that way. I suppose it would be staggered, but nonetheless, we need digital humanists now. I mean, I think some of you here who are probably physicists or computer scientists, the humanities are really far behind in terms of coming to this issue of how to digitize things. And so a lot of the physicists and the things I work with, they'll say, we confronted this problem 10 years ago, how to count collaborative work, how to do all those things. The students that I deal with, I want them to get jobs as digital humanists. They're going to come from, Texas A&M University and possibly get jobs at places like, Harvard. I mean, I'm dreaming big here, but they are, because they're not only digital specialists, they're subject specialists. What makes a digital specialist is a question. What makes a graduate student a digital humanist as opposed to just an English professor or a history professor or those questions? I have certain sorts of answers to that, but I'd rather just say that I do think it is really crucial for my graduate students to be doing digital work. And if they get jobs as digital humanists, you can bet I'm going to be right there taking a look at the contract they signed with whatever department it is, making sure that what they've done with their dissertations counts for tenure, as they go forward. But I mean, that's what you need to do. You negotiate on the way in that, okay, you are going to count this as such and such as part of your project. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, to address the question of the monograph, I think this gets back to a problem in the way that humans talk about technology, which is there's this idea that it suddenly showed up, right? That all of a sudden digital things happen, and now we have to confront technology and what it's done to us. But it's not true. I mean, humanity is shaped utterly and fundamentally by technology, and it's called print. So our two vehicles, monographs and scholarly articles, are just in many, many ways byproducts of the technology we had available to disseminate what we did. That's all they are. Well, that's not all they are, but that's one thing they are, and they're fundamentally shaped by that. And we tend to just assume in their automatic virtue or merit, or their automatic appropriateness as containers for what we want to do as humans. And that's not necessarily the case. They're the containers we've been able to build with this, what's really an incredible and sophisticated technology, print. Medievalists have a sore spot about that for years, because print distorts the way textuality worked in manuscript cultures. The sorts of critical editions we built for years using print have absolutely forced upon our editions assumptions that are antithetical to the way textual traditions work. So, for example, the very notion of single author as the primary criterion for building an edition, when you've got a few witnesses that are wildly different, no one knows who wrote them, isn't necessarily the best one. But hey, that's what we've done as a discipline. That's what we've built. Right? We built these sort of print containers that work in this way, and so that's one reason, is that the monograph is it's partly a technological solution to what we're doing. It's partly a technological vehicle, and it does certain things very well. I doubt it'll actually go away. I'd like to write one myself, but it doesn't do everything equally well, nor is it, because it's been there that long, the gold standard in a way that we shouldn't have it. And I also agree with what you said about this about editing, and I think this is a cultural problem, because at some point in the English departments, criticism was valued and editing wasn't, and that was a mistake. That was a battle where there was blood on the floor. Certain people won, certain people lost. But it's wrong to say that critical editing wasn't of equal scholarly merit to critical articles and monographs. That was just the law about. When I was in grad school, I was told digital humanities is a double kiss of death. Because I wanted to do an edition, and then I wanted to do digital. And they said the problem with both of them is they're technical. It's the same problem, it's just duplicated digital. And then some people were saying, no, it's going to be the next big thing. And I wasn't sure, but I thought, you know what? Man, I decided to make a living on 14th century poetry. Why sell out now, right? I mean, really? I now make a decision based on money? Come on. I'm doing anyway, so I did. I made a digital edition, double kiss of death. And sure enough, I lucked out because now everyone wants a digital humanist, even if they don't know how to do it. So, so.
I think the key thing is, particularly for PhD students and people early in career, is the negotiation and the clarification of what is going to pass muster, what's acceptable in the culture of the department, and your mention of the contract, negotiating those things up front. Okay, what of my work is going to qualify for tenure, and to know that at the start. Then you're all on the same page, but to get that in maybe an MOU or some kind of documentation so that everybody knows from the beginning, and there are no surprises. I love the idea that you get a review every year, because then you get continual feedback and you know that you're on the same page. You can get advice as you're going along.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger issue of what I was saying before is that these things need to be negotiated. And we have to actively push to have them negotiated and discussed in our departments now as faculty members. And as people coming into the academy, having those negotiations up front so that you are getting yourself into a situation where you can thrive. And then making the decisions about what kind of digital project you're going to do now as opposed to later in a strategic way. It's different when you're hiring a digital humanist, because there the modes are different. The monograph might not be the best way of making your first major statement as that kind of scholar. But the container point's important too, because we all still do the same thing in that we step back, we think about, we analyze, and we make an argument about the material that we're dealing with. Even if you're a scientist, you have to spend all that time in the lab, and nobody gives you credit for that. Nobody says, well, you wrote a 10-page dissertation, but boy, you spent a lot of time in the lab, and you made a lot of smoke and chemicals do things, so you get credit for that. There's a certain amount of digital work that we do that is similar to the lab work, and a lot of it's just hard labor, and you're just not going to get credit for that. But what we do end up producing is some sort of articulation of the content, some sort of critical examination of it. And it might be in the form of an article, it could even be in the form of a monograph, or it might be in the form of a complex set of digital objects represented in a web page. But there needs to be a refocusing on the intellectual content, the articulation of it, and not so much the container that it is packaged in.
I could add to that, because I, for 2 or 3 years, hosted the MLA workshop on promotion and tenure, which this is NEH Institute was kind of a spin-off of, where we brought deans and chairs together and we gave them tenure cases, pretend tenure cases. Susan Schreibman came up with the basic model for it. And so I gave myself as part of my CV as a pretend tenure case, and I even went so far as to get an article of mine out of JSTOR and Photoshop the name, to protect the innocent. And so, but we gave this one tenure case, and it was me as a programmer, right? It was me writing XSLT, which is actually technically a programming language. People always say that's code lore, but it is actually technically a program. So I wrote all these programs for editions, didn't do the editions myself, didn't do any of the intellectual content. We used just the programming of the digital humanist as the tenure case. And then an article, precisely what Brent just said, which describes some of the things that you learn from that. That passed. You know, the minute you're doing that reflection. That said, it is often the case that the candidate themselves for tenure is not in the position to reflect themselves. In other words, you can make claims about some of the work you've done that'll just look like puffery to a tenure and promotion committee. It won't look like a serious research claim. And so those of us who are in the digital communities, in a way, have, and Andy and I as directors of 18 Connect and NINES respectively, have to write these letters and say, look, this is the theory that went into this, and this is what it means, and this is the research that had to be done. Because there is a profound difference between a project that is the equivalent of 3x5 cards or labor in the lab and something that can be used by a whole bunch of people to do a whole lot of cutting edge research, right? And so you have to articulate for the candidates themselves the difference. The candidate can't do that, they're not in the position, the rhetorical position to do it. And what we noticed in that workshop is when we did get the candidates trying to articulate it, they made false claims about the digital, right? They were just forced into the position of having to say, this will change the world, There's a
lot of grant language that sort of creeps into that. But one thing that did come out is that the article was key. So we're living this interregnum, and your point sort of speaks to that. That we still want the printed, the article that reflects on the project, that describes, what conversations it's entering into, all the things that we do with traditional scholarship, and we want the digital project. And so, a point of fact, with our graduate students at UVA, we tell them to write a traditional dissertation and do a digital project, right? Because, the jobs are shrinking. Guess what that means? It's a lot more competitive. You better have the book and the digital project, because people out there do. And so we're trying to poise our students. So there are DH jobs out there, but you're not going to get the real faculty positions in a discipline with DH unless you have some sign that you're going to eventually produce a monograph. That's our sense with our grad students. But it's just not right. Now, they could do purely digital dissertations. That's welcome. But they're almost certainly to move into an alt-act track at that point and be hired by the GLAM sector, gallery, library, archive, museum, or some kind of IT. They'll move into that academic world probably because they'll have a PhD. They'll be a digital humanist. But it's another way of kind of siphoning them off from the departments and the colleges, which is where I'm trying to get them back into. So I want to try to figure out, what's the path that's going to make you an assistant professor of English, that's my department, and a digital humanist at the same time? Well, you better write a traditional dissertation, and you better but if you want to be a digital person, a dissertation better have some purchase on the digital and vice versa. And Tim's point's really well taken. I mean, I think of digital humanist in a certain way as someone who thinks about information, in a particular kind of way. Technology, media, abstraction, representation, these are things we've thought about as humanists all the time. And so far as you can make that happen in a digital space, the meditations become, it's not just you're a tool builder over here, or a programmer over here, and then you also happen to work on medieval this, but the way you look at medieval objects, or the way you look at 18th century print, learns from the way that you look at the digital and vice versa. So the two become not just what I'm doing with my left hand, I have to be doing the digital, but that the digital is somehow necessary for reframing the kinds of questions I'm asking as an 18th century scholar, and meanwhile publishing articles and hopefully eventually a book in those conversations that have been primarily analog conversations. The digital is different kind of intervention. Well, can I just annotate that really quickly, because it's even more ramified by the crisis in the humanities at modern universities. So a lot of times when you're trying to make the case to provost level or high dean level even about the value of the humanities, you're already fighting an uphill battle, or you're trying to do some education about why my studying an obscure novel by a 19th century woman and me spending a year's leave doing that is equivalent to someone who's doing, a photon collider. You know what I mean? So you have that initial uphill battle. It would be different if you were approaching upper level administrators who had a deep respect for the humanities and really loved those old tomes and that had a deep appreciation for philological tradition. We're like, you're monkeying with the very foundation of the university. Where's your philology? Where's your classics? They're not saying that. They're saying that they like the digital because it looks more like entrepreneurial innovation. And so you have this weird kind of double shuffle with upper level administrations. On the one hand, they open their doors as wider than they ever have to me as an English department member, because they're like, they sniff Mellon money, they sniff NEH money, Google gave me money to do justice. So if Google's giving money to an English department guy, I want him in my office tomorrow morning. But if I said, oh yeah, I'm gonna take a sabbatical and work on this 19th century novel, I'll probably write a couple articles about it. Oh, well, they've already stopped listening. They're already asleep before I even finish the sentence. So you're kind of having a double, on the one hand, having to convince them They want to be convinced, but I'm also trying to fight for the humanities and the modern university at the same time, and I feel like the two conversations are braided and complicated.
Which is that there has been in the humanities, as you well know, a denigration of outreach as service.
Right.
And that is obviously what's killing us. You're absolutely right. But there is a difference between keeping a box of 3x5 cards or creating a database that you just use for your research and actually doing something that is real, what I would call real intellectual work. I mean, if we can't come up here and say, let's count everything that's digital humanities. No, there are things that are digital that are teaching, there are things that are digital that are research, there are things that are digital that are service. However, how do you determine the difference between the card catalog or the database that's just said, and we all do lots of grunt work, and you don't get tenure for that, you never have. And you shouldn't, perhaps, if the university wants to be the kind of rigorous thing that it aspires to be. You have to show that you are a creative thinker. You have to show that you're able to do these things and that other people will care about it, right? But it has to be not just through popularity. So, I mean, I think the landscape is changing. The questions are, and I first encountered this as a pre-tenure person who went to the University of Virginia for a 9-summer workshop when it was directed by Jerome McGann. And what happened when I got there was I had a project, right? My little Poetess Archive database. I went to this workshop, and during the course of the week, I realized there was a difference between the little database that I had and the thing that it needed to be, and that it was a qualitative and intellectual difference. How do we articulate that? We have to do it. We can't just say, oh yes, accept all these things as research. They're not.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? How do we articulate that is, I think, the real question.
That goes back to the discussion about editing. I mean, our problem really does, in many ways, go back to that old problem where that resource building, the creation of primary materials that is essential and elemental to our work has not always been valued the way it should have been. And here we are, we're really doing the same kind of thing many times in the digital realm, creating the essential elements that other scholars would benefit from and need in order to do their work. So I think that's an important distinction to keep in mind. The other one, though, is that one of the work of the editor was that very important introduction where the significance of that work is articulated and laid out, where you explain why it's important and why your editorial decisions make a difference. And that's where you set out what is the qualitative element of this work that is so essential and so important. I mean, again, it really does come down to us articulating and saying, this is why this work is important, and making an argument, both in our production of the content itself, but also to get back to the way our department approached all this. We have now the idea is that whatever scholarly output you produce, you should produce a memo in which you say, this article was published here because this is the best place for this type of work, and this journal is a tier 2 journal, and this is the work and the substance that went into it. I wasn't just doing a bare reading of a short story, but I was doing archival research that uncovered new content, and articulating whatever kind of scholarly product we produce, making it clear so that as it goes up the food chain to the deans and the provosts and whoever, that we are always going to have to be defending ourselves and giving an account of ourselves and explaining exactly just why this is important.
Can I speak to that really quick? I think it's great. The idea of articulation is really important, and there's two ways of thinking about that. Now, all of us are from English departments, and I'm assuming a number of you are as well. But in any case, I'm speaking in the position of English, and in fact, this NEH Institute, we eventually tried not to do all humanities departments. We're trying to do literatures departments because they have a particular attitude towards articulation. That is our object of study as well as our mode of communication. And so, when Brent's talking about articulation, I think it has to happen at two levels. One is memos, administrative internal documents, where you explain up the chain what it is I did, annual report type, annotated annual report type things. where you have to be as clear as possible. I think that's right. Then we also have this issue of how we express ourselves in prose. Because frankly, that's often how we evaluate one another, is the quality of the articulation. Right? You can't be a great English department member if you can't articulate your ideas. Right? The idea, or whatever you've done, or what, I mean, you can be okay. I mean, we have a reputation for being kind of bad writers, but in any case, the reason we're bad is we're trying to say something very complex in prose. Like, prose is our engine, in a sense. And so that makes it particularly ramified for English members of English departments to continue to use prose in various contexts, because that's the coin of the realm, even more than just the article or whatever. It's really how we articulate. And we tenure people who are articulate, not just verbally, but in prose and all of that. And if you're not, you tend not to succeed as well in the profession. Now, it may be that has been a false kind of, that has emerged from a star system that took off with Lionel Trilling and kind of went through Derrida, and maybe now we're actually moving on the other side of that, and we're saying, let's get back to building, let's get back to philological, self-effacing kinds of research projects, where it's not about that individual voice of the interpreter so much anymore, and that mind in collision with the object and the beautiful things that can be said about it. Maybe that was an artifact of a certain moment in humanities, particularly English department's research, but it's worth bringing all those ideas, I think, out on the table and trying to figure out what are our values and what do we want to sort of give way on or re-examine.
And just to add to,
and then there are two questions.
Sorry, just to add to that just a little bit, and I'll make this quick. There are monographs that shouldn't get people tenure, and they are published by very good presses. I'm just going to say that. So when we turn to the digital to work on this stuff, I mean, the reason they did get people tenure is because it was a shorthand. It was a shorthand for P&T committees who might have to look at 24 tenure cases and cannot read through the whole thing and judge the quality of scholarship. They just can't. So, I mean, we shouldn't idealize the system we have now. We know it's flawed, too. And we shouldn't hold ourselves to a higher standard than that. We do need to come up with mechanisms that make it possible for P&T committees to do their work, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We've relied on a narrow gate of publication before. That is, by the time something makes it through into print, a lot of people have looked at it, people have invested money, people decided it was better than other things. And so we could pre-process, in a sense. We could pre-read a lot of things. There's a pile of articles and books appears on your desk. You can kind of just look at the journal titles and the length and sort of see, does this look like, okay, I can look at them if I want, but I already kind of know where to place them because of that narrow gate. With the web, it's the opposite. The gate is wide open, and then it's just a question of how, it gets back to that point in the back, how do you count citation, how do you count usage, how do you count reaction, and it's a more fluid thing.
I mean, in our discipline in English literature, it's actually not the case that very many people have seen things through traditional peer review. I mean, for an article, it could just be two people. And, we've all had that experience. Everybody tells you your article gets rejected, just put it in an envelope and send it out again because it was just somebody who didn't like your argument, And so we've all gotten that advice. I do think, though, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the strengths of the art infrastructure is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring peer review to bear on digital projects. So anything can be out there on the web, but it might really be a service site, and it might not be something that we should aggregate. What we say in our editorial boards, and you could show you the editorial boards at mine, they're as illustrious as Cambridge University Press, right? And so you can say this thing was peer reviewed by all these people. So when I came up for promotion on my Poetess Archive database, I was promoted based on that because, John Bender, I'm just making up a name, but somebody had looked at it and had approved it. And so, I do think we need these to do this. We need to sort of honor the traditional modes that have gone through. There are, that are tried and true in a certain way, but there are alternative modes coming on the scene. And those would actually widen the number of peer reviews. For me, some of them look so scary because they also multiply the amount of work anybody on a P&T committee would have to do. And when you get up to being full professor, then you've got to review everybody, and you're like, oh my God, I just want to die. But for instance, Kathleen Fitzpatrick's comment press thing, you actually go and you're supposed to read through the comments that peers have made on this. Well, if you even ask P&T committees to read all the comments on the articles of all the articles that somebody published before they came up for tenure, you would just spend the rest of your life doing nothing but P&T reviews. So I'm not sure what those alternative methods are going to be, but they have to be some way of sort of expanding what we do, but realistically in a way that universities universities can handle it,
It gets back to Brent's point about articulation. We've got to find ways to synthesize that for committees, but it's going to take more work from everybody to really make this. It's not going to be a list of equivalent. You get one sheet of equivalences, and you can quickly do it and move it. PMT is not going to be business as usual if you're really going to do it in a responsible way. It's going to be more mentoring, yearly check-ins. That's more work for everybody. There's going to be more work on the candidate to explain what he or she is doing in more than they normally did in a PMT document, because it's going to have to be elaborate. And then the committee and whoever is running it is going to have to, whatever mentor level, are going to have to do more and invest more. So the question is, how can we find those efficiencies there and make it manageable for everyone while still admitting that the old processes are probably not going to be capacious enough to handle?